Hi everyone, this is Miwa. Welcome to our YouTube channel. I'm a director of Session Press and the manager of Dashed Book. I started my publishing company 10 years ago to connect Japan and the US through a photobook. Now I'm launching a new YouTube channel with Anne to introduce an incredible photographer from US and Europe and share my favorite book from Asia.
Hi everyone, I'm Anne. I'm a Vietnamese photographer based in New York. I will be co-producing the Photobook Club with Miwa on this channel. I think what makes this channel special is we hope to go beyond showcasing photo books and bring in photographers and a guest of their choice to be in conversation about their books to really dig deeper. For our first episode, we want to welcome Genesis Báez and Justine Kurland. They will be discussing Genesis' debut book, Blue Sun. It's published by Capricious. And after the episode, we will be talking about Masafumi Sanai's body hair photography.
Hope you enjoy our program.
I'm Genesis Báez, and I'm here with Justine Kurland.
Hi.
And Justine and I met in school at the Yale School of Art during critiques, and then we ended up working together in a number of workshops and in organizing photography exhibitions in our community.
Yeah. Thanks, Genesis. I'm really honored to be here. I'm such a huge fan of your work. I also curated you and Jenny Calavis in Silt of Each Other in my studio, which was such an incredible show. And some of the work is in this book we're here to discuss, Blue Sun. So I wanted to start by just asking you your origin story and how that's reflected in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because I would say that my relationship to photography is kind of intertwined with my origin story. So in a nutshell, I was born in Massachusetts to Puerto Rican migrants who moved there in the 80s and then subsequently moved back and forth in between the two places throughout my life. And so photography from the get-go became a way to make sense of that experience and of that oscillation between time and place and cultures.
I think you do that in a way that I haven't seen before. I think a lot of your photographs really break ideas of what documentary photography is, what a family portrait could be. Well, when you're talking about moving in between Puerto Rico and the U.S., this kind of diasporic migration, what are the things that you bring with you and what doesn't permeate between those borders?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually had a kind of photographic crisis around that when I was struggling to find what do I put in front of the camera, right? Like what is visible that could speak to that experience, which is actually so much kind of like embodied, right? And so yeah, I couldn't I feel like I had to make up a language to describe the things that we couldn't see. So I think the things that are taken with me in that oscillation and in that back and forth are very much embodied and are kind of lodged in sensorial memory. And I'm really inspired by the theorist Nadia Sedemitakis, who speaks about sensorial memory as a location for preserving knowledge and culture. And so that ended up informing a lot of this picture. So I end up using the visible world to describe the things that we can't see that are actually more kind of inward and rooted in feeling.
When you're talking, it's interesting. I wanted to talk about the very first picture in the book. But the first image that came to my mind just now is the oldest picture in the book, which is the picture of the clock that has this American Eagle gold. There's a clock in one circle, and then there's almost like a vaginal birthing that kind of births Puerto Rico through. It's like the craziest picture, the way that but I feel like that picture and so many of your other pictures, yes, like this is like a birth hole going from Puerto Rico, the United States, in this time, this kind of connecting all of these
time
kind
rendered in various kind of ways. The clock is static, and we know that because this is a long exposure, and so what was moving is registered as a blur. So it's like this gets into I think one of the more recent images, crossing time, right, where my mother is holding a string up to a wall, and then you see my shadow kind of apparently holding the other end, right? So then photography becomes this amazing tool that in one frame, in stasis, through stasis, can actually collapse these multiple planes of space, right? And kind of so like in, for example, the image of the eagle mirror that we just saw from 2011, and then 10-15 years later, the crossing time.
It is really interesting how you use all of these different modalities of photography, from staged pictures to observational pictures to abstractions, to kind of circle, to create a constellation around these themes throughout the book. The first picture in the book, can you talk, maybe you could talk about that, because there's also something where you're talking about your lineage, your family experience, but you're doing it through ecology, through so maybe could you talk about that, and maybe also talk about the title of the book?
Yeah, absolutely, all really good questions. So this image here is Condensation, San Juan Airport, and it is this meeting of hot and cold air, creating this half circle, half ring of condensation in the moments between dawn and day, a storm and a clear sky. And so that permeability that is happening here, even though this was more of an encountered moment, it came from this like quiet moment of observation and surprise, as opposed to staging. I think echoes throughout my works. So for example, in parting, in parentheses, braid, there's also a certain type of permeability happening of light and multiple planes coming together, and the window actually emerges as a theme in all of the works, right? Whether the window of the camera, the window of a space, the window in parting, parentheses, braid, is a cloth that's hung up in front of the camera, onto which our multiple shadows and silhouettes kind of overlap and disperse simultaneously. So I'm glad that you brought that picture up of the condensation, because I think that ends up both kind of formally and conceptually kind of like catalyzing a lot of the other images that are kind of rooted in permeability of light and water. And you mentioned ecology, and I wanted to more specifically reference my friend G. Rosa Ray, who in the studio visit with me mentioned, or actually when she visited Silt of Each Other in your studio, she mentioned that atmosphere is also a terrain. And so atmosphere is pictured throughout so many of the works. And I think of it as, it's ephemeral, it's shape-shifting, it's never still, yet omnipresent.
I want to find this one picture in the book. I don't know what it's called, but it's the one with the two houses and the little bits of like, oh, it's this.
Right.
So there's something about this picture too that is like, it's like a photograph of the weather. It's a photograph of the force of wind. Like I can feel that wind. But what I
Right.
love about this picture that's also is I also think you're like breaking Walker Evans.
Hmm.
You know, because it's like there's
Hmm.
something about this picture that reminds me of this one particular Walker Evans photograph that, you know, got crammed down my throat when I was a student, so maybe it doesn't even matter so much anymore, but I feel like you're straddling something about the history of photography
Mhm.
and suggesting that like actually there's all of this stuff here that
Mhm.
is contingent to the photographs because they're in the
Exactly.
world, but we're not seeing it.
Exactly. So then photography becomes this kind of amazing tool for, again, visualizing the things that we can't see, whether they are internal or lodged in the body, or whether they are actually like all around us, just not visible, right? Like humidity or weather or
Mm-hmm.
and so that image actually of the leaves flying in the suspended in the air in Chicago reminds me of the picture Butterfly.
Mm.
Butterfly is an image of two rocks on each side of the frame.
You're yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
With
Here.
the and then sand in the middle. So what you're
Yes.
looking at is sand that
Right.
has been moved around from the waves coming in and out. Yeah. So it looks like water, but what we're seeing is earth having kind of moved around and having kind of shape shifted into something that in a way reminds me of, a figure, a snow angel. I called
Mm.
it butterfly because it reminds me of one of my favorite artworks by Anna Mendieta, also
Mm-hmm.
called Butterfly.
Ooh, I feel like there's another Ana
Yeah.
Mendieta picture in here that I was just
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. Well, the one with the earth, and there's a little bit of light, and the light looks like a figure in it.
This
Yes.
one.
Oh my God, this is also a butterfly figure silhouette.
Yeah, exactly. And so in
Mm-hmm.
Anna Mendieta's Butterfly from 1975, it's a
Mm-hmm.
short film where um she's wearing big wings, and then she's manipulating the video so that the edges of her body kind of blend with her environment. And so it's throughout the short film, it's just the edges are blending. And so that picture that I made, Butterfly 2023, reminded me of that, and of earth and body, the edges between earth and body.
Well, I think it's really
Blending.
good to talk about also in terms of something very special that I think that your photographs do, where there is this attention to the land and to ecology and to telling a diasporic story in in terms of these kind of larger understandings of like who has livability, how
Yes.
the land works,
Yes.
water.
Yeah. Who
Yeah.
gets to relate to the land? Like, who gets to remain in relationship to land? And so I think that one of the things that is like so destructive and violent about colonization, and so just to kind of set the scene a bit for the world that this book is emerging from,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is the world's oldest colony. And so and it's been under US rule since 1898. So one of the things that has implied has been this rupture from the land and people being able to stay on that land or live from that land, or sustain that.
Sustain the land
Yeah,
itself.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that then, or even through the migration that has been perpetuated, right, by
Yeah.
colonial
Yeah.
legacies,
Yeah.
that is also another kind of rupture, and interruption, like, to the land. So anytime I've tried to kind of picture the land directly, um, in whether there or here or anywhere, there's something about it that doesn't quite line up with how I feel, in relation to land, which is actually more of
spiritual or
Yeah, exactly.
a
Yeah,
holistic way of
right.
being interconnected.
Right. Well, I think like that actually comes from feeling fragmented in relation to place and land. And so the way to remain kind of connected to place or to land or to the earth ends up being like maybe like more somatic or spiritual
embodied.
embodied.
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
yeah,
That's,
totally. And also like through kinship and care and like care for like caring for the land and caring for people. That makes sense. Yeah. But then the sky.
Yes.
But then the sky. but then there are so many images of the sky or images of like the land that like feel like images of the sky, like that constellation image where my mother and I are holding up strings, right, up to the sky. And so we see there's this like flattening of like the foreground and then like deep space. Like the cosmos, like you see the stars, and so it almost feels like in a way we're mapping the sky and mapping light, you know, as a way of like locating ourselves like here on earth.
I mean, I think there's something also like I'm thinking about this picture where your mother is holding the mirror and signaling.
My aunt,
your aunt, I'm sorry,
who's also my mother.
Yeah.
Madeline.
And I was thinking of the mirror between your two legs that, you know, kind of become your legs, so that the shadow self, yourself, and this mirror sky in between you that is jagged the same way that the dried earth is jagged. Like there's all of these rhymes and parallels in that. But I was really thinking about this super interesting way that you use mirrors in your work that seems so different from, you know, a kind of Western idea or just a contemporary photography idea that a mirror in a photograph is like a photograph in a photograph.
Yes.
You're using the mirror in a totally different way.
Absolutely. So actually that reminds me of another image that has been on my mind a lot, which is sound is also a wave, and it also includes a mirror. And so I think that one of the ways in which I'm thinking of mirrors is as a tool to for collaging in space, right, and like bringing multiple spaces into one frame. And I think of collage as a kind of collaging through composition, like a photographic composition as like a kind of diasporic site, or like a language for talking about existing in multiple places simultaneously. But it's interesting because the mirrors in a lot of my photographs, they also end up distorting a view, so they can't be trusted. And they often kind of conjure what we can't see. They're not just reflecting what we're already seeing, they're actually like revealing something that's not kind of visible in the rest of the image. And I think of mirrors as similar to water because, you know, and this is something that Sandra Perry, the artist Sandra Perry, whose work I admire so much, said to me in a studio visit once, that mirrors remain whole even when you break them apart. So like if you have a flower, a rose, and you like break it apart, you have like the petals and then you have the stem, but like a mirror, you can break it apart and it's still a whole mirror. And so water to me is like that. You can kind of like subdivide water into different containers and it is still whole, but it's also a mirror. You can use it to reflect, and it holds time. Another shout out to Amaryllis R. Flowers, a friend and artist, who once said to me that all the water that exists is all the water that has ever existed. And so, yeah, water as container for time and space, and as a tool to reflect, refract, collage, suspend, compress, distort.
So beautiful.
But then sound.
Yeah. Well, this picture has so much in it because it also talks about your other photographs. Like when I think about sound and I see this part of a radio, it makes me think about the image you have where the two girls are listening to the sound of the finger on the tip of the glass.
Mm-hmm.
There's the way that the mirrors that reflect emptiness
Mm-hmm.
remind me of the mirror in the yellow room.
Mm-hmm.
There's the water distortion reminds me of the picture where you and your mother, between you, are holding this large vase of water. And then your mother behind you there reminds me of the pictures you've made of family albums taped onto a window that have been eroded through the weather and the water to these kind of ghost images. So there's like, it's just, there's something so powerful about the ways that your images all kind of circle back and kind of, they riff on each other in this way that really kind of creates a shape around this blue sun that you're talking about.
Yeah,
Our
Yeah,
interconnectedness.
absolutely. Yeah. And also, I think something that ties all of those together is, sound, we can't necessarily see it, but we can feel it, right? Sound are like waves, like touching our body. So is light, you can like feel light. You can't look at the sun, but it's there and you see it all around. So this kind of tension between presence and absence, and to quote Sandra Perry again from that conversation we had at Skowhegan, she also said to me that absence is not empty.
Yeah.
And so and
just because it's absent doesn't mean there's nothing there.
Or just because it's not visible or easily photographed or seen, we can still feel it.
Yeah.
Or it still touches us.
I just reread the Audre Lorde Poetry is Not a Luxury, where she's talking in that essay about poetry as light, first of all, which is very photographic, but then talking about this thing that was kind of very revelatory for me, because she talks about how it is through feeling that we get to name our experiences in order to vocalize them, in order to have action, in order to have a political response.
Exactly. And so that brings me back to your last, or not last question, but comment about this blue sun that I'm creating. And I think another thing that ties these things together is this like half circle that emerges in all of the works. We start with this image of condensation.
Again, that picture has half.
Yeah, exactly, right, which is like a half circle. And then we end with an image of my mother and I using a garden hose to water the land and the trees emerging on my grandmother's land, and the hose makes a half circle. And so the beginning and end of the book, I like to think of it as when the book closes, these two half circles kind of become whole, like they become a circle of water, which to me is what is represented by blue sun. Yeah, blue circle, like a circle of water and light.
Yeah, so powerful, so incredible. I think maybe we could end with this one last thought that I had. I was thinking about who you are as an artist, the importance of this book, Blue Sun, and I was thinking about you in relationship to what I consider a movement in photography right now, that I would put people like Keisha Scarville, Tara Cranack, Whittling Cadet, people who are using photography in a very different way to talk about so many of the themes that we've touched on today, about our interconnectedness, about the archive, about channeling, about how the unseen is actually present. Can you talk about that and your relationship to these other artists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's such an honor to be thought about in relation to these artists that I admire so much, and I look to when I feel lost or alone in my practice. And I think something that we're all kind of working through is a kind of a conjuring, which I know that like Keisha just curated a show by that, at ICP by that title, and bringing it back to Sandra Perry, this idea that absence is not empty. I think all of these artists, Woodleen, Keisha, Tara, are like insisting on the presence, like within absence and conjuring from within that space, and photography, and are using photography so radically to insist on presence by like photographing the visible world to describe the parts of our experiences that have either been lost, have been erased, or are just simply like within us.
And before we go, Miwa, what would you say is your favorite photo book of the month?
My favorite book of the month will be Masafumi Sanai, Body Hair of the Photography. It's about the photography in poetry and then poetry in life. There is no good or bad, right and wrong, black and white kind of value system in this book.
I really like that you describe it as poetry, because when you flip through it and just look at the sequence, it feels dreamlike, and he's not really asking you to have an opinion about it.
Yes, it's very special. That's for today. Thank you for watching.